Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast, episode number 31. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hi, I'm Amanda Lowry, finalist in the Extreme Hunters Contest.
This is Boyd Barnett with Moultrie Products and the Moultrie Total Game Management Podcast.
This is Dean Vanier with Northwoods Common Sense.
This is Rob Lucas from Chasing Tail.
Tim Moore from TimMooreOutdoors.com, the New Hampshire Seacoast Guide.
This is Nathan Biggs with Browtime Productions.
You're listening to the
Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Welcome to the show, everybody. This is Jay Scott, your host of the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast, and this is episode number 31. Cannot believe it. And Dusty is here with me from Ohio. What's happening, Dusty?
Yeah, not a whole lot. You believe 31 people joined us on a podcast?
It's crazy. 31 times we've done this, and we've had 31 guests-ish, thereabouts.
Yeah, that's, I didn't get to do all of them, but, man, I've been here for a good while now.
Yeah, no, you've been here longer than you haven't, basically. So we've done more shows than when we didn't have you on the show. So yeah, you're now an official.
Yeah, it's
veteran.
been an awesome journey, and we hope that everybody enjoys us and keeps listening and tuning into us every Saturday at 5 o'clock.
5 a.m. And don't worry if you're not up at 5. We're going to repost it multiple times throughout the day so that you can listen and enjoy the content if it's a subject matter that you're interested in partaking in. We've had well over 10,000 listeners. In fact, every single week we're growing in the amount of listeners that listen for that week. So, in other words, yes, we're the more and more people are listening, but we're actually gaining more each week than we did the week before, which is kind of cool.
And if you take time and share our podcast, more and more people will keep listening.
Yeah. One of the things I want to cover early in the show this week, Dusty, is we always tell how to reach us at the end of the show, but I thought it'd be good if we kind of said in the beginning. So how do you actually, who are you? You're from Ohio. You're from Farmersville. We know we've learned a little bit. But one of the things that you've focused on creating is the Chubby Tines Outdoors. Where do people come to find your site?
We're on Facebook, and, we've got a website in the progress of getting started, and it's just been slow, been working a lot. But Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Look us up, give us a like. How can we get in touch with Big Buck Registry, Jay?
It's pretty easy. I'd love people to call in at 724-613-2825 to either leave feedback about this show or to just tell us a story about a hunt they're on or just to get in contact with us. So you can always send an email, Jay at Big Buck Registry. And then on anything that you look at, it's always Big Buck Registry. And that's Facebook. It's our website, bigbuckregistry.com. It's Twitter. That's our handle. The podcast is Big Buck Registry, the Big Buck Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry, Libsyn, TuneIn Radio. We're on all those major podcast directories.
We're everywhere.
We're in a lot of different spots. So that's all very cool. We've even got some, video on YouTube. It's kind of hard to do a video of an audio, but we do it anyway, because the content matter is important to our listeners. What do you want to talk about today, Dusty?
I want to get into kind of the know-how to properly cook venison. How about we get into that?
I have just the guy that I would like to interview and interrogate.
Yeah, you got us a butcher, and
yep.
Are you telling me you got us a chef?
I found us a chef. In fact, he's a good friend of mine, and it's
That's
somebody
awesome.
that I've known for quite a while, actually. And he is a graduate of Southern New Hampshire University, and he is the head chef at one of the high-end classy joints in downtown Concord, New Hampshire. And he is the head chef over there, and nothing leaves his kitchen without being perfect. And that's where I usually go to have a really great burger, or if I want frog wa or something like that, something fancy. He knows how to cook that too, but he's agreed to spill his guts about how to cook venison better, because one of the things he is when he's not being a chef is he is a hunter.
That's awesome.
He loves to hunt deer, goose, ducks. He loves to hunt, but he also loves to cook it. So he's going to share with us a lot of those tips.
Let's quit talking about him and get him on the show.
All right. His name is Corey Fletcher, head chef at the Granite in Concord, New Hampshire. And let's get Corey on the show right now.
Awesome.
Corey, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
No problem. What's going on, man?
Oh, nothing. Just relaxing. Actually, just got done teaching a class down at SNHU. My second semester doing that, so it's kind of a good way to apply my skills I learned in the field per se.
Very cool. Excellent. Now, you and I have been buddies for a while now, and we both share the passion of hunting. And fortunately, you've been trained in the culinary arts and run one of the high-end restaurants in Concord, New Hampshire, called the Granite. And you're the head chef there, correct?
I am, yes.
Beautiful. All right, so you've got the credentials that we're looking for on the Big Buck Registry to try to figure out how to make our venison dishes taste just a little bit better. And everybody comes to a venison recipe a certain way from what they've known or have experienced from what the grandfather taught them, or just what you can pick up in a recipe book.
Yep.
Or cookbook. I want to get into the nitty gritty. I want the truth about venison tonight. And I want to know what we need to know as hunters and as keepers of meat and venison in our freezer on how to make that taste the best. Because I bet there are some things that we don't know about yet that that'll make just our meals better all around.
Yeah, can't agree more. It's definitely the little things. I think the quality of the meat is definitely key, and that starts with field dressing, proper shot placement, making sure that animal obviously doesn't suffer, bleeds up quickly, all the way down to proper butchering, which you guys have discussed in the past. We
spoke to a fella by the name of Al out of Connecticut who used to run a deer butchery shop, and that was a few episodes ago, and he spoke to us about how to properly take the deer apart into the right pieces and to break it down as a butcher would. And this concept kind of overlaps with the culinary side of things.
We figured we might as well get a little deeper into this.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
We thought, having a head chef as a guest would be the appropriate next direction in this trilogy. So, all right. So tell us. Go ahead.
I was going to say, you definitely don't want to go through all that work and time sitting at the stand or walking a ridge line or something to
right.
Get that far and ruin it.
Exactly. And Al did bring up the point that it starts with a shot. Trying to make that right shot so you don't puncture any guts or anything like that. The shot is the first step. Second step, once you actually get the deer, is to properly remove it from the woods, because there's a lot of bacteria that is on the ground that you can introduce your meat to fairly easily if you don't drag it correctly or get it out correctly. Then it goes into using the right utensils, making sure you don't have overlap from the field into the processing spot wherever you're processing, and then making sure you keep the hair and the dirt and all that other stuff away from the meat, and then breaking it down into the parts.
Yep.
So where I wanted to pick up on this is, okay, we've taken the deer part. We've got it down to the front shoulder, the hindquarters, the tenderloins, the backstrap of the ribeyes, into the burger and all that stuff. And tonight what I want to try to do is put all those pieces together and how to cook each one the right way.
Yep.
But first I'd like to know what is so unique about venison that makes it different from any other meat?
I'd have to say it's probably not the meat itself, but probably the heritage and the annual tradition of chasing after that big buck. And when you're lucky enough to get one, you're not just down sitting for another meal. It's it's like you're reliving the hunt.
That's interesting you say that, because I would have guessed something else. So you think that the meat isn't all that different, but it's the tradition and the aspect of how we harvested the deer that's even more important than, or just the fact that you harvested the very animal that you're going to eat is different than eating a piece of meat that you never even looked at.
Absolutely. I think in America there's a huge disconnect of what's on our plate. and how it gets there versus, actually, harvesting the animal and butchering it down and, having it, come full circle. I think a lot of people are just used to, going to a grocery store and, getting a steak that's already cut and cleaned and, brought to the point where, it's ready to hit a pan or go in an oven. You're doing all that work and you're putting a lot of time and effort into it that makes it that much more special.
Gotcha. Do you think it's a respect element type of thing?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely the quality of the meat and the taste is, I think, just as good, if not better than beef. So.
Gotcha. One of the things that we talked to Al about is about how long to age the deer. And he said that if you can maintain the proper temperature at 38 degrees, ideally go 7 days because that'll break down the meats the most.
Yep.
But that you usually can't get there unless you're in a controlled environment. Right. We had a roadkill here just a little while ago, and we could only let it hang about 4 days because we had the right temps, and then it was dropping into the sub-zero weather, and it was going to freeze the meat. We didn't want that to happen either. So there's like this range where, everything's perfect, but you get too far out of that, and everything goes to hell, basically.
Yeah, it's definitely tougher in New England, as you know. You can get an early season archery kill, and it'll be 45 in the morning, but come the afternoon it'll be 75 or 80, and that's
right.
Not ideal temperature.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that lets the bacteria kind of grow when it gets too warm, and when you don't want frozen meat either. It kind of destroys the meat when you freeze it in a sense too, or it stops the natural curing of the meat from the enzymes.
Yep.
So we're down to let's start with the venison itself. So you think that the venison itself is unique, not so much in the meat itself, but that it is a tradition in that having an aspect of where we actually can harvest the meat or the deer ourselves and process that deer. That's something special that I get. And Dusty gets it, I'm sure.
Oh, for sure. That's it. Don't get no more important than that.
Right. It's an element to life that everybody should experience. And, this is why I frown upon those anti-hunters, because they don't even know what they're talking about.
Very rewarding.
Yes. It gives you a whole perspective on life, where your food comes from. It gives you a great deal of respect for not throwing food away and all that kind of stuff. So I get that. Now, the meat itself, though, it is lean.
Absolutely.
What challenges does that bring to you as a chef?
It either forces you to make a decision. You're going to have to, cook it relatively quick, or the complete opposite. Put it in a crock pot, sear it and braise it for, 3 hours or so. So there's really no middle ground like there is with, everyday proteins that people are used to. Pork, beef, chicken, you name it. It's really that marbling that people try to achieve so much in beef that is absolutely non-existent in venison.
Right.
So one way, shape, or form, you're either gonna have to add some sort of fat back into it, whether you're making sausage or burgers. If you cut it with some really fatty pork in the sausage making process, or if you get a buck later in the season where it's got a little more fat on it, you can reintroduce that back into back into the cooking process. Whether it's being ground up and added in the burger, but it's definitely need to add moisture back into it and protect the moisture that in the fat content that is minimal in whatever cut you choose to cook.
Let's start taking a look at the different cuts of the deer, and I want your opinion on how to deal with that cut and how to cook it appropriately. Let's start with where we started with Al. Let's start with the tenderloins. The tenderloins are on the inside of the animal. They're extremely delicate. They're extremely tender. Mm-hmm. Hence the word tenderloins.
Right.
What do I need to know about the tenderloin, and is it different than the other parts of meat, and because of the way it is?
I think like you said, the name kind of gives it away. It is tender. It's usually those tender cuts that you want to do that quick sear. Simple salt and pepper, high heat, a little bit of oil, and either sear it in a pan or throw it on a smoking hot grill, and just cook it to rare, medium rare. I wouldn't go any higher than that as far as doneness.
Okay.
Just kind of let that cut speak for itself. It's the prize of any animal, and you don't really want to ruin it. So just high heat, simple seasoning, and you're good to go. Is it
so? It's kind of like let's say tuna, like a high end tuna. It's like
absolutely.
You almost want to eat tuna raw because it's that good. It's that tender.
Yeah, I agree.
But if you are going to cook it and it's a high grade quality tuna, you just just douse it real quick with
Yep.
heat, high heat, quick, and then done.
Yep.
So-
you don't want to cut the tenderloin either. Just like you would a piece of tuna. You don't chunk up tuna into 1-inch squares and try to sear it, because it'll end up cooking all the way through. So
Right.
Leave that tenderloin whole. Any silver skin that's still on there, try to be careful and take that off as much as possible.
Okay, gotcha. Dusty, let's go into the ribeye piece. Let's go into the backstrap. Let's talk about that a little bit. And Dusty, you had made a point on the last episode when we were breaking down the deer with Al, is that the piece of the tenderloin that is perhaps the best piece of the tenderloin is called the tail, or Al called it the tail. The tail was the piece, not by the tail, it's actually the reverse. It actually cuts into the shoulder, just inside the shoulder. And that piece is supposedly the best part of the backstrap. Dusty, you want to walk us through the backstrap and all the different parts and how to cook those?
Yeah, from a chef's perspective, I want to ask, tell us a little bit about the difference between a butterflied piece of meat and just a standard, regular 1-inch cut.
The butterfly is essentially you take your 1-inch piece of backstrap, and a butterfly would essentially be, cutting it almost all the way through and then fanning it open so it would kind of, fold open almost like a hamburger bun that's not cut all the way through. You're just taking a thick piece and making it a little bit bigger, which is good to make the steak look bigger, but, backstrap, I kind of cook the same way, or would cook the same way as I would a, tenderloin. You just want to, high heat, do a quick sear or grill, whatever, marinade or dry rub you want to use, you can put that on there, but you definitely want to serve that, medium rare until you start getting into the more granular parts of sirloin steaks and shoulder steaks.
Excellent. A lot of people say that they like to get rid of the gamey taste in their backstraps. Is there any methods that you would walk through to maybe pull out? Some say meat, some say ice cold water, draw some of it out. You got any tips and tricks to get a little bit of the gamey taste out of it?
Whenever I hear the word gamey, I always chuckle a little bit. Obviously, I think people associate that irony, bloody taste with being gamey, but frankly, it's what venison can taste like. It's just like it's like most animals. If you have a piece of beef that's grass finished or corn finished, it's going to taste completely different. And what venison, what a deer eats is going to obviously affect what it tastes like. If you've got a deer that's roaming around an apple orchard eating apples all day versus one that's on an oak ridge chomping on acorns, you're going to have two completely different tasting animals, and that will affect give it potentially a more gamey flavor. I think the quality of the meat definitely will help with that. But if you do get one that you would consider gamey, I think definitely doing a marinade, whether it's a wet marinade or dry marinade, you can kind of influence the taste that way. So
let's talk through a marinade. Give us a marinade that definitely will increase our flavors and make our taste buds dance.
When I talk wet marinades, I talk, vinegars, wines, juices, that kind of stuff. I prefer more dry marinades, more spice blends. I've always enjoyed, crushed coriander, fennel seed, black peppercorns, salt, and just, exactly, just rub it right on the meat, and let it sit for about a half hour before you cook it. And the salt will, kind of help draw a little bit of moisture out to the outside when you're cooking it, to kind of help, give it a nice little crust along with those spices that, give you that, all those flavors of the spices, peppercorn and the fennel seed, and there's strong flavors, and they pair well with, strong flavor of venison.
Excellent. On a whole tenderloin, let's say we've cut the whole backstrap out, and we're going to do the whole tenderloin. Can you give us an ideal temperature range where that needs to be pulled off the grill?
Temperature range for cooking or temperature range for doneness?
Doneness.
I'd probably, maybe cook it maybe a total of, 4 or 5 minutes, depending on the size of it. Obviously as, proteins tighten up, if you think of an egg, you crack an egg right into a bowl, it's raw, it's very loose and runny. If you have a hard-boiled egg, it gets really hard and stiff, and that's a perfect example of what protein does when it cooks. It tightens up. So if you touch and feel, the difference between a raw tenderloin before you cook it, it's soft. You don't want it to get it too much harder than that. Just nice caramelization on the outside. So 4 minutes will be good.
Awesome.
Gotcha. Corey, can we go back to the spice blend a little bit?
Yep.
When you're putting a spice blend together, should we be taking the fennel seeds and all those things and making them into smaller granules? Should we put them into like a coffee grinder and get them into a really small piece, or is a whole okay?
Definitely want to grind them up. If they stay whole, they'll get crunchy and burn. You definitely want to, when you throw it in a coffee grinder, pulse it a couple of times. You almost want it to be the exact size of coffee grounds.
Okay. All right. So not tiny, but a bit of flake to it. Gotcha. And then that can be coated on anything that you're doing on the ribeye to encrust it, so to speak. Is that kind of the right word?
Yeah. Crusting is a perfect word.
Okay.
And, brush it, or roll it around a little bit of oil, and then you take your spices and just rub it on there and let it sit.
All right. So I take the piece of meat, I roll it around in the oil, and then I roll it around in the spice blend, whatever it is.
Yep.
And then that's going to become my crust as it cooks.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations on how long to cook a piece of meat? Does it depend upon the size and
a lot does depend on the size, in the thickness. I know just by my experience, I can look at it and I can touch it and know when it's done. A lot of people with not too much experience use meat thermometers.
Yep.
As far as a meat thermometer, you can probably cook it to probably 110, 115 for rare. The larger the piece of meat, it's obviously going to hold and retain heat a little bit, so it will cook a little bit more than a smaller piece would. But yeah, 110, 115 for rare, medium rare.
Okay. I always thought that was interesting that the doneness of the meat is directly relational to the temperature that the core meat achieves.
Yep.
And
that's why a lot of recipes too, say, bring steak to room temp. So that way the temperature, on the inside has a better chance of slowly getting to that, 110, 115 range, instead of, shocking it from, 45 straight out of or 40 right out of the fridge, up to 110, 115. It takes a little bit longer of a time.
Gotcha.
Which also increases, chance for, overcharring the outside of it, waiting for it to get to that, that ideal temperature.
Gotcha.
That's a great point there about room temperature. Let your meat get to room temperature before you start the process of cooking. That way, like you said, you don't get extra charring on the exterior, trying to get the interior well done enough for you to consume.
Yep.
All right. So being on the topic of bringing your meat to room temperature, that means that meat had to come from a spot where it was not room temp, probably from your freezer. Mm-hmm. What's your opinion on freezing meat, Corey?
I don't like doing it, but preserving the harvest, freezing is an absolute must. If you're not butchering your own meat, definitely have your processor cryovac it. I'll often, take that extra step to prevent freezer burn when I process my deers by wrapping it in plastic wrap and then cryovacking it.
Oh, really?
It just gives that little extra added step.
So any protection that you can give it, you give it.
Yep. Any product that you handle, there's an acronym in the restaurant world called FATTOM. Food, air, time, temperature, oxygen, and moisture are all enemies of food, and that any of those 6 elements will help increase bacteria growth. And/or help deteriorate the meat.
Okay, so FATTOM, that's the acronym we got to remember. Go through that one more time. FAT, F stands for food. A
is for air. T is for time.
Time. Okay.
The second T is for temperature. O is for oxygen, and M is moisture.
All right, FATTOM. You got that, Dusty? FATTOM.
I got it. That's very interesting.
Got to remember FATTOM. All right. Okay, so what is your favorite cut out of the backstrap, Corey, to cook and to eat?
I'd have to say, closer more into the sirloin end.
Really? Okay.
You start getting, that almost, 2-section part of the backstrap. You almost start getting two different grains. And you've got that little, seam or muscle section kind of breaking off.
Gotcha. What does sirloin mean?
It's usually it's a cross cut of the top round and bottom round, and kind of right where the backstrap kind of continues and hooks up with the hind quarter.
Okay, gotcha. And we've talked these terms a little bit, but I want to make it absolutely crystal clear for our audience about what these things mean.
Yep.
All right, so you like the back piece of the ribeye.
Yep.
Okay. Let's get into that, the front shoulder and the neck. Is there any cut out of the shoulder of a deer that you think is a good cut of meat to not grind up?
I think usually when I butcher my deer, I usually use most of that for stew meat.
Okay.
Because the grain of the meat tends to be a little bit longer. It's not a huge muscle section, but it definitely does the work.
Right.
In comparison to hindquarters. So I usually like that for stew meat.
Stew meat. Okay. So stew meat's kind of the front shoulder. Is that kind of what you do with your stuff as well, Dusty? Stew meat for the front shoulder?
Yeah, I may pull a front shoulder roast out and use that, crock pot. Obviously, it's, stew meat in a sense, but I like to take one large chunk there.
Okay.
And the rest I try to grind.
Okay.
But, is that what you're talking about? Is front roast?
Yeah, front roast. Are there any front roasts or anything out of the front shoulder that you use as a roast as opposed to chopping it up into little pieces to use for more or less stew meat? And then also the other piece where you grind it up and make nothing but burger out of it.
Yeah, that's we definitely do a front shoulder roast. If it depends on the size of the animal too.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a difference. And as far as stew meat, and maybe we'll clear this up. Stew meat I see is small, chunky meat that's just thrown into a pot versus a large roast.
Right. I agree completely. Gotcha. All right, Corey, let's talk about burger for just a little bit. Seeing we're on the front piece. Should we mix venison burger with some kind of fat in order to achieve a good tasting venison burger, or does it matter?
It's kind of a personal preference. If you want to, get some pork fat back and grind it in with some, leaner grind, you can. I think it's definitely a personal preference. I've only done that a couple times and really haven't noticed too much of a difference. But the pork fat really doesn't have a huge amount of flavor difference compared to other fats. But it definitely adds moisture and it melts away, so it definitely helps retain moisture.
Okay, all right.
What do you recommend? Beef fat or pork fat?
I would prefer pork fat.
Pork fat in the venison burger. Okay. All right, so let's move off of the burger. Is there anything, or let's continue on the burger just for a bit. How do you prepare your best venison burger? And I don't want to share any proprietary secrets that you might have at the Granite, but if you're at home and you've got venison, because I'm not sure you guys serve a ton of venison down at the Granite. But
we don't. I do when I can. But
when you can get it.
Yeah.
How do you prepare your ideal burger at home when you're using venison?
I almost kind of make a meatloaf mix, add a little bit of garlic and onion, in with the patty, obviously salt, pepper, and just mince up the onion and garlic, mix in with your burger, season the meat throughout. Some people just make their patty and throw it on the grill, but I think the salt and pepper definitely go a long way. If anything, throughout this whole thing, I'd have to say properly seasoning meat is key.
Gotcha. On that subject, how important is seasoning? I want to hear it from you because I have an opinion about it, but I want to hear it from you.
It definitely ranks up there. I think after quality of meat being number one, cooking technique associated with the proper cut is number two. And if you do those two things right and you don't season it properly, you're not getting the most out of it. So it's definitely a 1, 2, 3 kind of thing, but they all tie in with each other.
Gotcha. All right. So rank 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
Got it. Stew meats. What's your favorite way to prepare venison stew?
Being a New Englander, I definitely have to say, the basic, searing it, a little bit red wine, beef stock, or venison stock if you, have save your bones and make stock that way. But we can talk about that later if you wish.
Right. Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later on.
But definitely potatoes, carrots, onions, and some basic herbs, thyme, rosemary, salt, and pepper, of course.
Right. The basics. The salt and pepper brings everything out and brings it all together, right?
Absolutely.
What is it about salt and pepper that kind of rounds it all out? When you were in culinary school, did they tell you, we all know that salt and pepper does something and it makes it taste better. But what is it about the salt and what is it about the pepper combined that makes food and especially meats taste rounded?
I think it just, it's tough question to answer because it's one of those things that day one cooking, it's just drilled in your head.
Right.
That I'm almost a salt freak.
Yep.
That I almost season things to a point where you can't taste the salt, but you know something's different about it.
Right.
Over salting is just carelessness and not tasting your product throughout the cooking process.
Right. But they didn't. So they drill it into your head in culinary boot camp, but they don't really explain why.
Pretty much.
Right. So yeah.
It definitely makes things taste better. I'm sure there's a whole chemical level more associated with the salt than it is the pepper.
Right. Now, Dusty, you're a kind of a salt expert. You showed me a video of you at work making salt, right? So,
actually, I'm making a salt brine.
You're making a salt brine. And Corey, Dusty is one of the guys that goes and makes sure the roads are safe in wintry conditions, and he uses a lot of salt on the roads, drives the big trucks. And he creates the salt brine. He showed me this video where it's so high tech that you basically have a water salt mixture that's tested and retested and monitored at 23 parts?
23.3 particles, yeah.
Yeah, 23.3% salt as part of this mixture, and that would keep the roads from freezing until you reach really super low temperature, right?
It's a de-icing agent.
De-icing agent. So if you think about it, if we're putting in some salt in our mouth, that water is going to, the water in the saliva in our mouth is going to, it's almost like it's a flavor carrier in a sense, kind of like fat is.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just a natural instinct for your taste buds to jump.
Right. But over salting, if that mixture is too bad or too much, it's not good for the roads either. If it's too little, it's too slippery.
Correct.
So it's over salting meat is similar to salting the roads. You can't have too much and you can't have too little because both sides of those spectrums kind of screws it up. But right in the middle, there's a sweet spot.
Yep.
Right. Gotcha.
Yep. And if you talking about curing, if you leave salt on any meat too long and too much of it, it'll actually draw whatever amount of moisture is in that out and dry it out. So
wow.
I think that's definitely a preserving method. A lot of ancient cultures used to supply products through harsher times of the years by curing them. And that's because you're taking out all the moisture, one of the items in Fat Tom, out of the product in order to make it last longer.
Gotcha.
Modern refrigeration has prevented the need for that step.
Right. Gotcha.
I got a great example of too much salt. Let's throw this out there just to put in perspective. If you happen to have a piece of leather, take and dump salt water on that piece of leather. Watch what the piece of leather does over a period of time, and your meat's the same exact way. It's going to draw up, get real dried out. It's no good.
I believe it.
So it's not good to eat. It doesn't taste like very good either. So, okay. So proper seasoning is super important.
Absolutely.
All right. So we've covered burger. We've covered, stew meat. So how to make the best burger, how to make the best stew. Let's move on to the backstrap a little bit. We talked about kind of the different portions of it, but as far as cooking backstrap, you can cut it into a roast. You can cut it into little, I call them medallions. What's the best way to cook this? And Dusty, I want your input on this as well, because you actually created a video for your Chubby Tines Outdoor website on Facebook about how you were cooking venison and lard. I want you to chime in here in a sec. But let's say we do a roast, Corey. What should we be putting on that roast? Just do another coating of the seasoning for the crusting point type thing?
Most roasts, I usually do the simple salt and pepper again, and do a quick sear on it.
Okay.
And then do a lower temperature roast in the oven. So you get that nice brown caramelization on that side, and then pop it in a 325 degree oven until you get that 115 mark. But that's gonna, depending on the size of the meat, that's gonna take anywhere between half hour to an hour, depending on the size of the cut.
Right. Okay. So we're taking a pan. You're taking a good sized skillet that you put on your oven or on your set top. Mm-hmm. Put a little olive oil in there or some kind of oil or butter.
I wouldn't use olive oil. I wouldn't use butter. Those have lower smoke points.
Okay.
When I say smoke point, I mean the temperature at which any oil begins to smoke. And where there's smoke, there's fire. And not necessarily fire, but, the flavor of, you're burning the oil essentially.
Okay.
And you're ruining the quality of the oil and then the quality of the roast itself. So you want to use a higher smoke point oil, like peanut oil or canola oil.
Interesting. Okay. I just learned something there. All right. So canola or peanut oil in order to get that first seared. Are you salting and peppering the meat before you sear it or after? Before. Salt, pepper, sear it with canola or peanut oil.
Yep.
And then put it in the oven.
Yes. And you definitely don't want to, just like you said, you want to season it and then have it hit the hot pan. Like I was saying earlier, bringing out the salt will bring out the moisture, and moisture prevents caramelization.
Right.
You definitely want to, get your oil in your pan, bring it almost at smoke point where you can kind of see the oil shimmer when you move the pan around. Salt, pepper the roast, sear it on all sides evenly. In that process, you might need to turn the heat down just a little bit to control the caramelization so it doesn't burn. And then into that 325 degree oven.
Okay. And then how long you cook it will be dependent upon the size of the roast. But you're always trying to achieve that 105, 1 to 115 internal temp. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's when your roast is done. Now, should we consider any other seasoning for a roast like that, or just salt and pepper?
I've done it in, many different applications where you can always set the roast on top of, julienne onions, carrots, potatoes, whole cloves of garlic just so the garlic doesn't burn over the long period of time. You can throw whole sprigs of rosemary or thyme or, that kind of stuff on it. You could also lay pieces of raw bacon over it after you sear it, and that will help keep any moisture that's in that larger cut from escaping.
Gotcha. And as far as, unlike a fatty beef roast and unlike a fatty pork roast, you're not going to have a lot of juices flowing out that are of the fat content, right?
Correct.
There's not going to be as much juice coming out, so you're not going to have the ability to use some of those juices for like a gravy or something like that. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I was gonna say that you could also, after you're done searing your pan, you can dump out the remaining cooking oil and deglaze it with beef stock or red wine, and then put that in the bottom of the roasting pan. And as that liquid evaporates, not only will it concentrate, but it's also creating steam to keep that, the roast moist, since it doesn't have a lot of marbling or fat in it, to create more moisture.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is where I want to bring Dusty back in, because Dusty, you were cut what I think was backstrap. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
In the video, you had some backstrap, and you had used lard as your cooking agent. And walk us through how you cook that what I call the medallion, or just a thinner, 1 inch piece, 1 inch thick cut of ribeye, basically.
Correct.
Tell us how you made that.
It was very simple. Obviously I start out with a chunk of lard, and my key is to start the lard a little bit hotter for the first initial sear. Soon I do a seasoning. I go into flour and then into my hot lard. The initial sear of that hot lard, and gets the moisture sealed in. Quick sear, turn your heat down. Definitely start out a little bit hotter lard grease and back it down once you get that first initial impact on it.
So it almost creates this breading outside kind of, right? It's almost like breaded beef and breaded red meat.
Yeah, it's just like a country fried steak.
Country fried steak, right?
That's exactly what I was just thinking too.
Right.
I think my mouth's watering.
Yeah, that just sounds good. Country fried venison steak. I like the sounds of that.
It come from Kentucky. Being down there with family, and that was kind of like what we grew up on when we was down there. They had homemade flour. It don't get no better. Every time I go, I bring some back with me.
Homemade flour. Walk us through that a little bit. I need to know more.
Oh, that's just where they grind their own flour. It's, no different in store-bought, but it's more fresher, and it's got a different taste to it.
So what are you grinding up? Wheat or something else?
Corn. Yeah, you're grinding all your own mixtures right there, and they have different seasonings you can get, different flour seasonings. I'm trying to think, like they do a poppy seed flour. They do let me think here. couple different ones.
That's cool. So that's something I haven't heard about. So, okay. So, Corey, have you heard about this kind of stuff where you actually create your own flour and do like these compound flours almost, in a sense?
I've heard about it a little bit, but it's nothing I've really played around with. I know in the baking world, there's, almond flour, which everyone's like, oh, is it gluten-free or whatever,
Right.
Well, it's finely ground almonds, so realistically you can make quote-unquote flour out of anything that you grind into a finite powder.
As long as it's dry enough, and then you can grind it down so it becomes flaky and so it doesn't stick. That's pretty cool, Dusty. So you actually, guys down in Kentucky, from where your family was from, you were making corn flour, so to speak, and
Correct.
and then adding some different elements, different flavorings into each flour.
Yeah, it's just like flavored flour.
Right.
It's all bagged right there. It's ground right there. It's all done right there.
What do they use for a grinder?
They got an old belt drive, which just got what's called crunchers on it.
Gotcha.
And you just dump your corn through, and it's an old Model A tractor. And it's a hit and miss.
I was just gonna say,
you laugh all you want.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you.
It's it's definitely old timers.
That's awesome.
It's really cool to see. It's a neat experience. And next time I'm there, I'll take a video.
This is the old school stuff I'd love to hear about. So it's bringing in the old school culinary from the South and the old school culinary from just hunting and bringing it all into one piece. That's why I like this show so much.
Yeah, it's the modern technology there. There's no money to afford it. So
right.
It's they make do with what they got, and the old corn grinder and it's got crunchers on it.
Right.
It just crunches the corn down and makes it powder form. Comes out to the other end.
Right.
It's really unique.
What's interesting is that they took what they had. But the end goal was to make something taste better. So it doesn't matter, what the technology is or how much money you have. Their whole goal was to make something taste better, which is awesome. And they figured out a way to do it.
And affordable. So making things taste better doesn't mean you have to add money. So does that equate to your thoughts, Corey?
Absolutely. I was just thinking back to, speaking about tradition. A lot of, America's kind of a melting pot of, many different cultures, both historically and culinarily. But the two are very closely associated. It's, what happens in Kentucky with grinding corn into flour, us folk up here in New Hampshire have no clue.
Right.
Or, what you're talking about, because we've never done it. It was never part of our heritage or way of life because we never had to do it.
Right. It's not, New Hampshire was never really flooded with lots of grains. There are some, but it's not the part of the country that you would consider famous for its grain production. Let's get into the hindquarters a little bit. Let's talk about some more of the sirloin and some of the cuts that come out of the hindquarters, like the top round, bottom round.
Yep.
What do you do with those?
I like to do a larger roast with those. You do a pot roast. You could take your top round, season it with salt and pepper again, sweat a little bit of onions, sear off the top round, and then that's going to be one of those long cooking techniques where you add a little bit of liquid to it. Put it in a crock pot or put it in keep it in the same pan, cover with foil, and forget about it for 3-4 hours. Let those long fibers. Muscle fibers relax, cook down, break down, and do its thing and create flavor.
Gotcha. I think that's basically the breakdown of the whole deer at that point. Let's talk about venison chili a little bit. How do you make your venison chili? Is there something that I need to incorporate into a venison chili to offset some of the lack of fat, or is it good just going as it is?
I like to do it the way it is. I know there's a huge debate out there is, if you should make chili out of a hamburger or ground venison, or if you do it with chunks. And I like to do it with the chunks. I like that meaty, chewy texture where it's almost like a stew, but you've got your tomatoes, you've got beans, you've got onions. If you like it spicy, you can throw some poblanos or jalapenos or other peppers if you want it spicier. But I think it's that slow and low, long cooking time that really makes all the flavors come together over time that makes chili.
Right. Yep. Chili is one of those low and slow in a crock pot kind of thing. Yep. Dusty, what other dishes do you want to ask Corey about? What other dishes do you want to try to make better?
Yeah, let's get into the other end of the deer. I want to talk a little bit about the neck meat.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get into something that, tell us a way we can fix that, not only to tenderize it a little bit better. Obviously that's the toughest part of the deer, the neck meat. What can we do to make that a good meal?
I've never done it with venison, but I've done it with other animal neck meat, more so veal. You can, if you get a chance to have it be on one flat slab that almost kind of looks like a square. You can essentially make a stuffing with it. You could take a fork and kind of break up the muscle strands. Season it, and you can make a stuffing with some ground venison, onions, celery, some diced bread, and then stuff that and make it into a roll, and then roast that whole, and then slice that really really thin. That's what we call in the culinary world a roulade, where you take a larger, thinner piece of meat, stuff it with something, and roll it up.
A roulade?
Roulade. R-O-U-L-A-D-E.
Roulade. Okay, got it.
Man, that sounds like that should bring out the flavors and break it down a little bit as it cooks. That's a great idea with that.
Should if you're dealing with that tougher piece of meat, is that something you should pound out, like to get it tenderized?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay,
yep.
Gotcha. What other dishes should we be considering, Corey, with venison that we haven't talked about tonight?
I mentioned earlier about making stock. I don't know how many people out there keep the bones. I know some people get a little weirded out by it because it is a wild game, and there's more marrow and more bacteria or room for bacteria in the bones. But if you treat the carcass correctly, during the butchering process, and you know that you're going to use those bones, minimize hair, minimize dirt, just don't throw them aside. You can roast the bones and make a really really good stock, and there's a lot of nutrients in stocks.
Okay, bring us through that a little bit deeper. So sure. How do you have some bones? The bones that I have usually get thrown to the coyotes or coyote bait, basically. Yep. So you're saying we can keep the bones, we can make a venison stock out of it. How do you make the venison stock? You take some of the bones, you break them down into usable pieces, and then you throw them in a pot. Then what?
Per 5 pounds of bones, I'd take 2 onions, cut the ends off, peel them, and a large dice, meaning about roughly 1 inch square, and as well as 6 ribs of celery, large dice, 4 carrots, peeled, large dice as well, and those 3 items there are called mirepoix,
right,
which technically is 50% onion, 25% celery, 25% carrot, and you can roast that as well along with your bones.
Now you keep saying roast. Does that mean when I think of roast, I'm thinking about putting something in the oven? Are you putting it in an oven, or are you keeping it up on the top?
You can put it in an oven.
Okay.
Yep. Roast it right along with the bones in a large pan. You don't want to. Your ultimate goal when you roast anything is to create caramelization and ultimately flavor.
Okay.
You don't want to use a small pot. You want to get your widest, biggest pan or a casserole dish or what have you, and spread your bones and your mirepoix out in a single layer so it can evenly caramelize and become brown.
Okay.
If you have it all in one small pot, just the top's going to become caramelized and the rest are just going to steam.
Am I adding water to this stuff, or am I just letting it go the way it is?
Just leave it dry and put it in the oven. Probably 350 degrees for probably hour and a half.
Okay. And do I cover it with anything? Do I cover is it I don't know, what's one of those big cast iron pots, and you put the cover over it and then put it in the oven? Do I cover it, or do I not cover it?
You don't want to cover it because you don't want to create steam.
Okay.
You want that dry heat to caramelize the bones.
Okay. So what's left when you're all done? What do we do with it after it's done cooking?
Once you roast the bones in the mirepoix, then you can take all of that and put it into a pot.
Okay.
Fill it with cold water and cover it by about an inch or two. And you want to slowly bring it to a boil. And then once it comes to a boil, you want to turn the heat back down to a low heat where it's just simmering. And then let that simmer away for probably 6-8 hours or so. That's definitely something you want to start first thing in the morning and let it go all day.
Gotcha. So you take everything was in the roast, or that you roasted, and then put it into the pan to basically cook down with water.
absolutely.
Gotcha. That's so cool. Dusty, have you ever made venison stock?
I haven't. It's just something that I haven't done and I need to.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So which bones should we be using? Should we be using front shoulder bones? Should we be using backbone? Should we be using the hindquarters or the leg bones? What bones are good for that?
Pretty much any bone. I might stay away from the rib bones just because they're a little bit smaller, and they're tougher to cut up and process, and be able to fit into the roasting pan and stock pot. But if you have the ability to cut them into 3-4 inch chunks, they're a lot easier to handle, and you won't get as frustrated if you're making it for the first time.
Gotcha. Is there anything that you can do with the ribs now that you brought up the ribs? I always feel like the ribs get overlooked, and there's usually even a piece of flank meat on there that often gets overlooked or even thrown to the coyotes. Can we do anything with those?
There tends to be a little more fat around that area, so don't be afraid to, as long as you're not getting any pieces of cartilage or anything, don't be afraid to, put that right into grind. I don't know how you feel about that, but it's what I do. And any amount of fat that you have, is flavor.
Okay.
Going back into the burger.
Okay. Can we do anything with the ribs itself? Can we make ribs like you would pork ribs or spare ribs or anything like that? Is that possible with venison, or is it just too lean?
It's too lean.
Okay.
And I don't think there's not enough meat on it to really make it worth your while.
Okay. And what should we do with the stock once it's all done?
You want to strain that liquid through a sieve or something to get all the spent bones and mirepoix out of that. Over that long cooking time, the water that you originally started with, is going to have a nice dark brown, very flavorful look and taste to it. So after it's strained, you can discard the bones and the mirepoix.
Okay. And as far as the stock, what do you use it in? For me, I've used beef stock, vegetable stock, chicken stock, and other things. Just makes everything taste better when you start with a stock, it seems. Same thing with the venison stock?
Yep, use it in the same way. You can, put it in quart containers, or I've done it in gallon Ziploc bags.
Okay.
Which makes it a little bit easier for freezing.
Yep.
Same thing. You don't want to have a lot of, air exposure to that, because that'll create freezer burn.
Okay.
Which will make all your hard work, go bye-bye.
Gotcha. So you can freeze this stuff and keep it for dishes down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. You can
Awesome.
use great on gravies. In the restaurant, I do a lot with stocks, and we make what's called a gloss, which is any stock that is reduced down. It's a really long process, but it's definitely worth it.
Okay.
You would just take the finished stock and slowly simmer it, so you'll see steam rising but not boiling, until you have a thicker stock essentially, and all you're doing is concentrating the flavors.
Gotcha. Now, it sounds like we're concentrating the venison flavor. Now, venison in itself, and we've talked about the gaminess of venison before, does it just concentrate the gaminess or the flavor, the natural flavor of venison, or does it turn out to be something different?
It shouldn't concentrate the gaminess, because there's, I think most of the flavor is in the meat, but you're definitely, having other things in that stock to give it other flavors than just venison.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Dusty, what other questions do you have for Corey?
Yeah, I'm going to get into something that, back in the day was very big. Tell us, if you can, tell us some information on prepping and cooking the heart.
Ooh, good question.
I would definitely, classify that as one of those, quick cooking techniques. High heat, little amount of oil. You want to sear it.
Are we talking thin sliced, or tell us how to prep it, cook it? Tell us all about it.
I would definitely, do if I was going to sear it, slice it thin, a little bit of salt and pepper, almost the same way that you'd cook a calf liver. You don't want to ruin it, because it will get tough. I don't know if you've done it before. I haven't, but I've heard of people grinding it up into their burger. It just gives it a different amount of flavor to it, and it's not wasted.
Right, but it's still an organ. Organs have a little different flavors, a little more dense.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Has how would you describe the flavor of an organ, Dusty? Would it be like it's a little more gamey, I think, in a sense.
It's hard to define gamey,
Yeah.
It's one of them that it's a different acquired taste. How about we leave it at that?
It's not bad. It's just, but it is a flavor. It's a different flavor than than you'll find anywhere else, and it's a more concentrated flavor, I think.
Yeah, it's like no other.
Right. What about the liver? Seeing we're on the topic of organs, livers are not considered really a good edible piece these days anymore. Is that right, Corey?
I'd have to agree with that, especially being a wild animal. Who knows, if it has chronic wasting disease, if it's essentially a filter to extract anything bad that's going through, your blood system.
Even like heavy metals and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I haven't eaten a deer liver in years. It's probably been 20 years now, because it's been one of those things that the Fish and Game has decided is not a great idea for human consumption anymore.
It's not worth the risk.
Right.
It's fine with, chicken livers or, foie gras, which is, force-fed duck liver, or even calf's liver, because there's, the USDA's, looking right over their shoulder, knowing what the animal's eating, knowing how it's, being processed, and, they're willing to put their stamp on it. And I think venison liver is definitely a little risky.
Okay. Gotcha. As far as like the bone marrow, deer bones are pretty small. In general, is the marrow edible, and is it something you would consider as a chef that you'd want to try to eat?
If you're making stock from the bones, you can, elements of the marrow are getting broken down and into the stock, which will, give it some thickening, abilities. Because marrow is mostly protein. It's kind of a personal judgment call right there. There's a lot of stuff going through the marrow too.
Okay.
Same as the liver.
So sometimes you see like a cut of bone on a beef critter that would be edible, like marrow, because there's enough of it, right?
Right.
But deer, it's a little harder to get to that state.
Yep.
What other dishes would you create with venison that you wouldn't create with beef? That's a tough one.
I like when we stump him.
No.
None that, well, I've eaten calf's brains before. I don't know if I would do that with venison.
Right.
I know one thing that I would cook, that I think a lot of people now putting towards hamburger is, shanks, that lower section of the leg that's, really long, tough muscle fibers.
Yep.
That would be, definitely braise those, a quick hot sear, and then you can take some of that stock that we just talked about.
Yep.
Cover it with the stock and slow and low for 3-4 hours until the meat is really nice and tender.
Just break down all that connective tissue.
Yep.
Gotcha. Any other dishes that you want to share with us, Corey?
Nothing that comes out of my top of my head.
Okay, gotcha.
I think we covered a good chunk of the animal.
We've covered a great deal tonight. Dusty, do you have any other questions for Corey?
No, I sure don't. And Corey, you've been very informal, and great job on answering questions, and hopefully it helps somebody prepare their venison.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
thank
that's
you very
cool.
much.
And Corey, before we let you go, could you just sum up just the key elements that we should keep on the tip of our head when we're cooking venison? What are the key points that we should always focus on?
Probably definitely the correct cooking method for the correct cut of meat. Talked about the tenderloin being, a quick cook, keeping it rare, medium rare, right around 110, 115 degrees. Same thing with the backstrap. When we start getting into some of the tough cuts like, top round, bottom round, the larger roasts, you want to, still incorporate that quick cooking technique, but then you want to slow it down a little bit, and make sure that, the larger roasts are still, cooked evenly all the way through, and then all the way to braising.
Okay.
Definitely want to, cook the pieces, slow and low for, up to 3-4 hours.
Gotcha. I always get concerned about the overcooking because it's so lean. Is that something that we need to take into consideration?
It definitely is, as long as there's introduction of a different type of moisture or fat in one way, shape, or form.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I think this has been a pretty darn good show.
I'd have to agree.
Yeah, man, we've covered a lot. We've learned a lot about the culinary. We learned about making flour in Kentucky, and thanks to Dusty for doing that. Well, Dusty, what do you say? You think we should let Corey go here? And are you working tonight, Corey?
No, I've got tonight off. So
Gotcha. Well, I'll let you get back to doing whatever else you had planned. But this has been awesome. Been very informative.
Thanks for coming on, Corey. It's the listeners will definitely enjoy having you aboard.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Well, thanks for having me.
Oh man, that was so cool. Got to listen to Corey tell us all about how to cook venison.
Just like any other interview we do, I learned something, and that's that means a ton.
It does. I mean, I think I'm a good cook. I learned from my wife. My wife went to school with Corey, actually, to be a chef, and she is a trained chef. She does more baking, but she knows a lot of techniques, and I've learned a lot from her. In fact, back in the day, before my wife went to culinary school, I used to do all the cooking. And then I sent her to culinary school, and she's like, "Get out of the kitchen. You suck."
That'll do it. Culinary school will kick a fella out of the kitchen if you want to.
And so I paid attention to the things she was doing, and I learned how to boil water better, for that matter. I mean, everything was better from that point forward. I
almost had to get off the podcast. You realize this?
Why is that?
My mouth was watering, and I was ready to go lay out some tenderloins. I was so close to saying, I got to go, guys.
I have to say that I still don't let my wife near my grill, but it's just a guy's thing. And she has some challenges on the grill. She's great inside the kitchen, but you open it up on a outside grill, not as much. You know what I made this weekend, Dusty? And I should have asked Corey a little bit about this. I made some venison jerky.
Did you?
I did. And I should have talked to Corey some more, but I just pulled some venison, not brand new venison either, not from last year. It was a couple years old, but it was heat sealed, shrink wrapped, vacuum packed, no freezer burn whatsoever. And it came out delicious. It was fantastic. I tried a bunch of different recipes. I've never made venison jerky on my own.
How did it turn out?
It was delicious. I will never, basically any meat that comes my way, no matter what it is, I will never refuse it, because I can sit down in a weekend and make a giant batch and hand it out because people will enjoy it.
Yeah, you're talking this up so good that I might be expecting some for the PA show.
That's a great idea. I will have some with me for sure.
Awesome.
It may be a brand new batch, because the batch I made, and I started with 5 pounds of venison and ended up with a lot less, because obviously dehydrate it, get all the moisture out. But I'm not sure it's going to make it that far. So I'll have another batch ready for you, and I'm going to make for you the batch that I like the best, because I experiment 5 different types of recipes, and I picked out the one that I like the best.
Awesome.
The one that I like the best actually used a molasses bacon powder rub along with a shot of Knob Creek maple whiskey, and then
Knob Creek,
a lot of the other good stuff. But man, that one was by far the best.
Yeah, I'm expecting it now, and thanks, Jay.
You got it, bud. All right, let's. We talked about a little bit about how to reach each other, and for our listeners to reach us in the very beginning. Why don't you cap that up again and tell us how to reach you?
Facebook.com/Chubby Times Outdoors.
Very cool. All right, and if you'd like to reach me, send me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com. Give us some feedback on the show, 724-613-2825. We want to hear what you think about the Big Buck Registry. I would also like to know if you think we should do a Big Buck Registry contest this year, a photo contest for Buck of the Year. And that would be a great place to call it in, 724-613-2825. And on Facebook, facebook.com, Big Buck Registry, twitter.com, Big Buck Registry. Across the board, Big Buck Registry. Dusty, I think I got to go cook some venison because I'm kind of hungry now.
Yeah, I actually texted my wife and told her to lay some out in the middle of that podcast.
There you go. That's the way to do it. Well, I think that's a wrap, man.
Awesome. Tune in every Saturday, 5 a.m.
And don't worry, we're going to replay it throughout the day. So we'll send links just in case you missed it in the original feed. Oh, and share for share. By the way, you can send me a direct message. I may or may not share back, but if I really like you, I'm going to ask you to be a guest on the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
And that's a cool way to check out and meet new people and get them on the podcast.
Absolutely. And Dusty, before we let this thing wrap up, tell us where we're going to be in a few weeks.
February 1st to the 9th is the Great American Outdoor Show in Harrisburg, PA, and we're going to be there.
I cannot wait for that.
It's going to be a definite good time.
All right, man. I think that's a show. This is Jay Scott.
And I'm Dusty Phillips.
This is the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast. See you next week.
Can't wait.